The House of Representatives today voted almost unanimously, 410 to 4, to grant broad subpoena powers to the House Judiciary Committee in its inquiry into the impeachment of the president. Only once before has the House taken such a vote in the matter of the impeachment of President Andrew Johnson, and 99% of the members voted for the unqualified subpoena powers.
No one argued against the impeachment investigation. The only disagreement was whether to put a time limit on the resolution.
John Chancellor there back in 1974, the NBC Nightly News, 1974. That was a year when Republicans ultimately abandoned Richard Nixon and forced him to resign as president. Thus far, this has not been the case when it comes to Trump and today's Republicans. The House vote to formalize the impeachment inquiry was split mostly along party lines. There were no GOP defections this week, a fact that has not gone unnoticed by the president.
With all of this that's happening, I think the Republicans have been amazing. We had 195 or 196 to nothing. We have tremendous support from the Senate. We have tremendous support from the House. We even had Democrats go over to the Republican side yesterday in the House.
Thursday's vote essentially directed the chairs of 6 House committees to continue their impeachment inquiries. That means the scope is not limited to Trump's dealings with Ukraine. The Washington Post reporting tonight, quote, the centerpiece of House Democrats' eventual impeachment charges is widely expected to be Trump's alleged abuse of power over Ukraine. But obstruction of Congress is now all but certain to be introduced as well, according to multiple Democratic lawmakers and aides, just as it was 5 decades ago when the House Judiciary Committee voted for articles of impeachment against then-President Richard Nixon. With us now, Jill Wine-Banks, attorney, former assistant Watergate special counsel, and an MSNBC legal analyst. She is also author of the forthcoming book, The Watergate Girl, My Fight for Truth and Justice Against a Criminal President. It is due out in February. Jill, thanks for being here tonight. Appreciate it. Well, we just put the clip up. So the closest thing to a comparable vote in 1974 with Nixon and what happened this week was the vote we just showed the clip of. 410 to 4. It was basically unanimous in the House. Democrats and Republicans, I don't need to tell you, there were very divided feelings about Nixon, but there was unity on the question of the investigation. In this week, near absolute total partisan division. What's the difference?
The media, the fact that we had NBC, ABC, CBS, and all of them had the same facts. There was no argument about facts. That was clear. John Chancellor had the same story as Huntley, Brinkley, et cetera. And now we have total bubbles of information so that people believe totally different things, even though only one can be true. And I believe that what we're hearing here on MSNBC are the facts. They represent what's really going on. And we have to remember, although it was 410 to 4, it also ended up at the end where there was a unanimous, not unanimous, but there was clearly going to be a conviction in the Senate, and that it was the Republicans who went to Nixon and said, if you do not resign, you will be convicted. He said, well, I still have a lot of support in the Senate. Barry Goldwater allegedly said to him, you don't even have my vote. And that's when he resigned. And
that was it. And obviously, the president, we showed at that rally tonight, talking about trying to keep Republicans together. Listen to something he said. Let's play this clip from the rally tonight.
The Republicans have great policy. In many ways, they're better politicians, but they're not as vicious. Thank you, darling. I appreciate it. They're not as vicious, but they have a tendency to split apart. The Democrats don't seem to have any Mitt Romneys. We do.
So Romney is on his mind there. Romney been one of the most outspoken Trump critics in this, who's emerged so far. How do you see the House vote this week? Every single Republican voted against the resolution. Do you read that as, if it comes to articles of impeachment, that means they're dug in, they'll all vote against articles of impeachment? Or do you see wiggle room that vote doesn't necessarily indicate?
I think right now they are unanimous in their support because they're afraid of Donald Trump, and he is obviously bribing them with money, saying if you want money to support your campaign and if you don't want to have an opponent in the primary, you better support me. And he has raised an enormous amount of money. But I think in the end, once they go back home and start hearing from their constituents who are starting to believe and understand, and we now have almost 50% of the American people, 49%, say that he should not only be impeached, he should be removed. That's a very dramatic thing. And also, if you follow the statistics from Watergate, it's not dissimilar. In Watergate, you had a very popular president, someone who won 49 states, who won the overwhelming popular vote. And yet at the end, as the facts started coming out, those numbers switched. So he went from having over a 64% approval rating to having a 20% approval rating, and support for impeachment went from 20% to over 50%. It was really correlated to the facts. The issue now is, will people who watch Fox News get the same facts? Will they see the full hearings? Will they see the live witnesses? It was very dramatic when John Dean raised his hand and testified. There were 3 times more people watching than watched Michael Cohen. And so we need to get the people to watch it. The public hearings are extremely important. And people are starting to understand Ukraine in a way they never understood the Mueller-Russia investigation. They seem to really somehow inherently just get that what he did was an abuse of power, that he was basically shaking down a foreign government. And even though he, during the Mueller report, said, well, maybe he didn't know that it was wrong to take money from a foreign government, after the Mueller report, there's no question that Donald Trump and his entire family know that you cannot ask for or accept anything from a foreign government. And asking for help with your campaign is clearly something of value that is illegal. So, and we don't need illegal. I don't want to focus on crimes, because high crimes and misdemeanors does not mean a violation of the federal code.
Let me ask you this. February 1974, the House launches the impeachment inquiry formally. End of July, the Judiciary Committee votes out, I think it was 27 to 11 articles of impeachment. Within 2 weeks, Nixon's done. He resigns. It's over. That was about a 5.5-month, 6-month process there. How fast do you think things would move right now?
Well, the obstruction here, the stonewalling, is much greater. And actually, the count, the article of impeachment that I really think is significant is the contempt of Congress, which is just as bad as the obstruction, just as bad as the abuse, maybe even more so, because it's destroying democracy, which is built on having checks and balances and having oversight. And if you say, I won't have any witnesses come in from the White House for anything, he's not letting them come in to talk about immigration. We're not just talking about criminal investigations. It's the entire oversight process that's being challenged. Everything happened really quickly during Watergate, and they are doing much better job of dragging their feet. The courts acted on, they expedited cases, and things went fast. And the one thing you left out in what happened in that period was we had subpoenaed in the prosecution office 64 additional tapes, one of which was the smoking gun tape. And the minute that got heard, it was like the final straw. It was one where you could hear the president and his chief of staff talking about using the CIA to stop the FBI from following the money trail, because the money came from the committee to reelect the president to pay for the burglary at the DNC. And once people heard that, that was the end. People said, this is real. We have to get rid of him.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.